this is a real unfortunate feature of a lot of mental health conditions. I'm gonna sound like an expert here, but it's a term that I've learned from an expert called anosognosia, and that refers to it's a lack of personal insight. And a lot of people with mental health conditions, especially when they're experiencing the most acute parts of them, they don't understand what's happening to them. And they're not, and again, if they're manic, they're just not able to see that they need help, or they may not even want help. So it's really, that's where learning how to communicate differently comes in. That's where learning how to take care of yourself comes in. And these are the kinds of things that you're going to learn in a NAMI class, and it's going to get reinforced in a NAMI support group.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who's out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode.
Welcome to the show, The Exploding Human. This is Bob Nickman. That gentleman you heard at the beginning, it was Tim Davis. He is the program director for the National Alliance of Mental Illness, the office in Westwood. And we're going to be talking to him about, well, that topic. Before we get to him, I just want to invite you to come and visit my website, theexplodinghuman.com, TheExploding.com. Check it out. Got photos of all my guests, all the episodes, synopses of the episodes, a little bio on myself, a few other interesting items, and a donate button if you'd care to participate in supporting the show. I won't say no. Thanks very much. And if you have time, go to YouTube and subscribe to my YouTube channel for free. It is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. You need to add the with Bob Nickman, and would appreciate that. Talking to Tim Davis today. As I said, he is the program director of the National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI. It's called NAMI, the acronym. And he became a part of that organization when his son was found to have a bipolar situation. So he started to go there as a client, and then he became very immersed in that world and is now their program director. And Tim is super honest, super vulnerable, insightful, and experienced. So it's you get both sides with him. You get the anecdotal and you get the education part. And Tim has his own interesting story that he's going to tell, but he did have a very tragic incident when he was a young man, and that really informed his life path, and we're going to find out about that. And all these things have led Tim to become a very passionate advocate for mental health, awareness, and treatment. So here he is, Tim Davis. Welcome to the Santa Monica Public Library, Tim.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, we're glad you're here, and I say we, but it's just me.
the royal me.
Some people talk about themselves as we.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but they do. And I just did it, and I felt weird about it, so I'm not going to do that anymore.
No shame from me on that.
I was intrigued by what I had heard of your story, which is that you have a son who was diagnosed bipolar, and then you became a volunteer at the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and now you have become the local program director.
That is correct, and that is of course just a small portion of my story, but it's a significant one, right?
Well, that's why we sort of got together, but let's find out even more. So right. You were not somebody that was involved in mental health issues, mental illness.
Not involved in mental health and nonprofits, any kind of advocacy. I was similar to you, Bob. I was a TV writer in a former life. I feel like I have many former lives, but being in show business seemed to be almost like mandated based on, I came from a show business family,
Oh, okay.
very accomplished writers, mostly on both sides of my family. But in my mother's case, her father, his name was Herman Mankiewicz, who died 10 years before I was born. But Herman Mankiewicz was the co-writer of Citizen Kane, and his brother was Joe Mankiewicz, and so I just, who was also pretty
Yes,
accomplished
absolutely.
writer and director.
I'm just finding this out right now, along with the podcast audience. Fantastic.
Well, yeah, but it's something I found out as I was coming to consciousness, and I just always felt like, first of all, I was never somebody growing up who could look down the road. I was always very, for better or worse, really rooted in the present, and mostly in the idea of how can I have as much fun as possible right now. But growing up in an accomplished family, there is always this feeling like there's sort of a lot expected of you. And I remember a word that I was tagged with a lot was potential. Tim has so much potential.
Yeah.
He has so many talents. He could do so much, And I was a decent student, but that's the best you could say about me. I was a decent student who really didn't care very much about school, except making friends and having fun. And it's interesting because I really have tried. I don't think as a parent that we're always trying to make up for the mistakes that we feel were done to us. So I've tried not to put those kind of expectations on my kids, but I'm sure I have. But I did always feel like there was an expectation to do something important, to contribute in a meaningful way, and that way was probably going to be through entertainment, show business. And I really loved movies, and I loved the people that I knew who made them. My dad actually made documentary movies, and I remember saying to him growing up, why don't you make a real movie? And of course, he, in some respects, what he was doing were more real than the movies I thought were real. And while I'm talking about my family, he actually made a really great documentary about the Vietnam War called Hearts and Minds, which
yes, I remember that.
Won an Academy Award. And I know you asked, I have not forgot, you asked about my son and how that...
Yeah, I know we're going to get to that.
We're going to get there. How much time do we have?
As much as we want. There's no rules in this little adventure.
I love that. That's my kind of adventure. So anyway, I do remember like being told a lot of potential, you're a good writer, and I got out of college and I moved out here. I grew up in New York City. I moved out here and I had a cousin who wrote for Miami Vice, and I just sort of worked my way through various parts of the entertainment business. I worked for a big producer named T-Bone Burnett back in the 80s. I got a job in the radio business, writing for a radio show hosted by J.J. Jackson from MTV, one of the first MTV hosts. And then I found myself, I got a job as a D dude at doing development for Tom Cruise for his production company for 2 years. And that, boy, I mean, I thought like, okay, now I'm on the Paramount lot. There's stuff happening. I'm working for the biggest movie star in the world. And I do not want to say anything that, let's say, one of my former Cruise Wagner colleagues was listening. I don't want to offend anybody, but it was really a soul crushing experience for me.
I want to get back to find out what your mother's side of the family did too.
Well, the mother's side.
That was the mother's side.
The
father's
father.
Side.
So
documentaries, and his father was some other writer.
So my father's father was also a screenwriter, and wrote. My father's mother was a intellectual writer in the 20s and 30s named Tess Schlesinger. She was a great writer, Tess Schlesinger, but my grandfather convinced her to work on movies with him. And one movie they wrote was called A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. It's a beautiful, heartbreaking movie. I think made in the late 30s. So that's my dad's side of the family. And my dad and mom both grew up out here in California and then moved back east for college. And that they met and then settled in New York. So that's where I was raised.
Eventually, we're going to get to mental illness, but this is a good background for it. A lettered show business family.
Well, I think that's why I was starting to talk about it, because I did feel sort of pressure and expectations, even though nobody overtly said that. It's just like all of my family wound up kind of finding some niche in the business. I never felt totally connected to what I was doing. I felt like I was doing it for someone else. I really, looking back over the whole trajectory, I really feel like I was more connected to California and Los Angeles than I was to show business. Actually, I've left out a very important piece of my trajectory. I was always a big, I was going to say experimenter, but I indulged a lot starting in early high school, drugs and alcohol. And I think that was another reason. I think, well, first of all, I think I'm an addict alcoholic. I have no problem identifying like that. But I think I was also coping with a lot of my anxieties and fears and also a childhood trauma that I suffered. And I don't know that I told you about this when we spoke.
I was told by the person who...
Susan?
Susan, yeah, she said that there was a childhood trauma, but she wasn't, something with your mother.
Well, also, I just went to a lecture on trauma that was sponsored by Nami, and I'm gonna get to Nami because Nami is a phenomenal organization and puts on a lot of great, has a lot of great
and
resources.
Nami is the National Alliance of Mental
Yes, National
Illness.
Alliance on Mental Illness. But this lecture this week was about trauma, specifically childhood trauma, also known as ACE. You ever heard the term
No.
ACE? Adverse childhood experience.
Isn't that just called childhood?
Well, that's what I think. Isn't all? I mean, but you know what was interesting? He presented a pie chart of how many ACEs people have experienced in their lives, and there was like 0 was a certain percentage, and then 1 ACE, adverse childhood experience, 2, 3, and they all had different percentages. The largest percentage, I think, was 34% said 0 adverse childhood experience, and I just think I can't even imagine. I don't know what that could possibly look like, and I don't know that I believe it either.
I don't believe it. I think it's called major denial.
That's 34% of people in denial. Yeah, but I would say I would fall probably into the 2 or 3 category. But the big one for me was seeing my mom get killed in New York by a taxi. We were in the summer of 1974, and we had been back for a couple weeks, and we had been evicted from our apartment in the village because they had sublet it, and that was against regulations in Greenwich Village. So my mom and I spent this great last day of her life looking for new apartments, not aware that it was the last day, but we did have a really nice day together, and we came home after this day. She actually took me bowling, and I bowled my best. I had my best score ever. I don't know what significance to attach to that, but really just a sweet, connected, loving day with her.
And how old were you?
I was 11. She had just published her first novel, and I think it had come out in paperback, and maybe the New York Post was interviewing her, and I remember being around for that. And then we were going to walk over to a friend's. It was friends we hadn't seen for a year, so we were going to have a little visit with them later in kind of late afternoon. And we were walking over to see them, and we got to the end of our block, and 2 taxis came barreling down these small village streets. Both went through stop signs. They hit each other, and one of the cars spun around and hit her as we were sort of approaching the curb. And I kind of have I have flashes of this memory, like a yellow flash, and I think we were holding hands. I've always, later I've gone to plenty of therapy around this. I've never actually done trauma work around this, which seems silly, especially now that I'm in the mental health game. I feel like I want to start diving a little deeper. But I've done a lot of, and I've had a lot of guilt around it. Like, I was sort of facing the street, so I actually saw the cars as they were approaching and hit each other. Of course, it was going super fast. But I always felt like, why couldn't I have just yanked her out of the way? And really what I remember doing, though, is turning and running. And I don't know if I ran after she was hit or when, but I got about halfway down the block. And and the reason I don't mind going into the detail, first of all, you have a very warm, open presence, and I feel totally comfortable telling you this. But I also think it's kind of in alignment with the show, diving deep on these kinds of things. And I remember getting about halfway down the block, turning around, and having just a split second of awareness, like I don't want to fucking even look. And maybe even close my eyes. But when I opened my eyes, I could see my mom's legs. Her body was sort of hidden by the corner. And then I walked back, and a crowd had already formed. And yeah, I spent the rest of the day in a police car and then up in a neighbor's apartment until my dad came home with my brother. They had spent the day at the New York Public Library researching my dad's next project.
I can't even imagine.
So that's called an ACE. It wasn't like I was completely unconscious about it. I mean, my dad sent me to therapists. But I wound up really coping with that myself without really being able to take advantage of the help that was offered to me. And the big way I was coping was drugs and alcohol. It just numbed things out. It helped compartmentalize things for me. And you know what it also did is it relieved the family pressure. To go back to that earlier thread, it relieved the family pressure of, oh, you got to make something of yourself. Because you know what? No, fuck it, I don't. I don't have to make something myself. I just suffered this awful thing. I'm going to use that's going to be my ace in the hole. And, and so I'm a fuck up. That's my brand. I'm the fuck up.
Yeah, I figured that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. You got that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a ticket to that sort of forces you into this other realm that people who haven't had certain things happen don't get to experience. There are some I don't want to say advantages. There are some.
There are. I think there are advantages because, well, first of all, you know how I said I'm always wired to be in the present. I think that has served me in a lot of ways. And I've also always been very grateful, and it's been easy for me to access my gratitude for the people in my life, for the people who, and to tell them that. And I think that's been recognized.
I didn't want to make it seem to cheapen the idea of that kind of a passing of one's parent as an advantage. I mean, it's a horrible tragedy, but what is obviously you found some kind of a plus or multiple pluses to going from that moment into the rest of your life, because you still have to live.
Yeah, but you can't. I think it's really hard to say, okay, so this awful thing happened to me. What am I going to make of this? I think.
Well, I don't think you do that. I don't think that happens, especially at that age.
No, not at that age. But I've had enough experience over the course of my life making lemonade out of lemons, where I do feel when my son suffered his manic episode, there was a moment where I really did think, like, what am I going to make of this? And what am I going to make of this, first of all, for him? And, boy, I'm feeling this. And what am I going to make of this for me and for my daughter? And, so that we're not victims of his brain chemistry. I was very determined not to be a victim, even though I did. And by the way, I'll tell you another advantage. Girls like the sensitive, wounded kid. I for sure used this as a teenager as a way of saying, I'm a sensitive little boy. I know that I traded on that, and that
if you don't have great looks, which you do also have. That.
Okay. Well, that's sweet of you to say. But I definitely felt like I was. Bob, are you flirting with me?
No, I just didn't want to say.
Right, you didn't want to make it sound like I was trading on this trauma because I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, because you don't have the other goods.
Right.
But you have obviously a winning personality.
Well, okay, funny you say that.
Yeah.
Do you know about the Strengths Finder? I was thinking about this. I was talking to my sister about this. Oh God, I feel like an exploding human here. I have so many thoughts.
That's great, but we have time. So
Okay.
let's talk about what is it? The strength.
The Strengths Finder was a test developed by the Gallup organization for corporations to use to identify their employees' strengths. It's like a personality test you take. It takes about a half an hour. Pretty rigorous questions they ask, and the answers you give reveal your top latent talents that, if usefully applied, become strengths. So my top strengths when I took this test were woo, in no particular order. Woo, which is winning over others, charm, positivity, which is something that, and all these strengths can also cut both ways, because there are some experiences where you shouldn't be positive. And I do feel, and I feel like I always relentlessly, like when my kids would complain about something, I'd immediately go to the silver lining instead of like connecting with them.
Yeah, I have a friend, he says, I'm the kind of guy that I'll walk into a room full of shit and I'll go, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere.
Well, okay, that's my kind of guy. But you know what? Sometimes you got to stop and smell the shit, and so that you're not living in fantasy. I, by the way, identify as a fantasy addict too, and there's another program for that. So woo, positivity, empathy, adaptability, and restorative. That one was a little fuzzy for me, but it was interesting. When I saw these, they all kind of made sense to me. I've been very adaptable, very much, always been able to sort of roll with the punches. And I think a lot of times it has served me and a lot of times not. What can you do with it? And, with my mother dying, it wasn't what I did. It was what the universe did. My dad ended up remarrying 5 years later, and I've got these two awesome siblings who I retired the half prefix, and they're my younger brother and sister, who would not be here, or they wouldn't be here in this form if my mom hadn't died.
Mm-hmm. The Strengths Finder, did that connect around the same time that you found out that your son was bipolar?
Just before. My son was a senior in high school, and it was in February of 2018, and he started to act really odd, is the only way I can describe it. And, his mom and I grew up in the 80s, and he was just acting like somebody on coke, but he never came down. So it was a week straight of just super accelerated, agitated behavior. He felt great. He felt like he could do no wrong. But again, I had no idea. We had no idea what this was, what had caused this behavior. We just thought he was taking drugs, and we were mad at him and accusing him, and we were getting into fights. And thank God there was a counselor at his school who knew what he was going through, and he called us in and he said, "Your son's having a manic episode. You need to take him to the ER immediately." And that was in, like I said, early February of 2018. Did not even know about Nami at that point. But within a week, my ex-wife and we got divorced in 2008, and we both heard about Nami through separate people, and I wound up taking one of Nami's free 12-week classes, and I am going to do some plugging of Nami resources because they're phenomenal. And
that's one of the reasons we're here.
Exactly. So I'll get a plug in right now for their family to family class, and that's for family members who have a loved one with a mental health condition. And I took the class, and it was really eye-opening. And you're getting some really good education about a subject that's very tricky, and you're also getting a community. It was something I was looking forward to every week, to come and plug in with these people who kind of knew what I was going through. And my son actually, before the class even ended, it's a 12-week class, before it ended, he had another manic episode. But by then, we kind of knew what it was, and we had a better idea of how to support him around it and get him help. But when the class ended, I went and talked to one of my teachers of the class. Her name is Sharon Dunas, and she is she's a legend of this, in the mental health advocacy world in Los Angeles. Sharon was also the co-president of Nami West Side, and I went to her after the class. I said, Sharon, I love this organization. I want to be part of it. And I had already done some volunteering for them, but I also, at that point, I needed a job. And I said, look, is there anything for me to do around the office? And one thing led to another, and I wound up getting a part-time, very low-paying role as the education coordinator, which meant I was just responsible for putting on the class that I had just taken. I also got trained very early on at NAMI and to be a presenter for one of their other fantastic programs called Ending the Silence, where we go into schools and we talk to students, middle and high school students, about everything mental health related, about the importance of prioritizing mental health in their lives, how to recognize warning signs of mental health conditions, and how to respond if you're experiencing a mental health condition yourself, or if you're concerned about a friend. And, we talk about suicide, and we talk about drug and alcohol abuse, and all these topics that I know a lot about now because of my history. And I talk about trauma, it's fantastic to be able to talk so easily about it without shame, and really in the process of doing that, kind of lead by example, to show these kids how important it is to talk about these things. The other part of the Ending the Silence presentation features a young presenter between the ages of 18 and 35 who identifies as having a mental health condition. The first presenter, the role I play, is called lead presenter, and that's generally a family member. The youth presenter talks about living with a mental health condition. And my son, after getting some recovery and getting better, he had to take a gap year after graduating high school. So he took a gap year, didn't spend it exactly the way he thought he would, but he wound up getting trained, and he and I give these presentations together when he's in town.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a couple of questions that come to my mind, because I have kids too. When did you not notice anything prior to this manic episode in his youth or other periods of time? And what is the onset of this, and what are the causes? I mean, I have so many questions. I'm not going to be able to ask them all. Yeah. But my first question is, there was no signs, or were there signs when he was younger, and how did they manifest?
So my son is an awesome human being and was from day one, and really had an extraordinary mind from a very early age, like noticeable. Like he taught himself to read at 2. I remember being he came with me into a fitting room. I was trying on some pants, and when he was like 2.5, and he was reading the signs on the wall, and he could phonetically spell out manufacturer, and we knew that was kind of a wild thing. And so we were really, for the first half of his life, for the first 10 years of his life, we were chasing it, or trying to keep up with that mind. All he wanted to do was stay inside and read. He was just wanted to read, and he's very creative and make up stories and games, and he was anxious. He was an anxious kid, and I think that was a result a little bit of how his mind never stopped. He went to the local elementary school, Roosevelt, when he was in kindergarten, and they were sending him to 5th grade for reading, because that was the level he was at. And I remember being kind of alternately proud, but also really concerned that, like, he was in with kids twice his age. And he came home and he told us one day that someone said, "Oh, here comes the little freak genius," or something, when he came up to the class. And so that was sort of his label for a while, and his IQ was off the charts. And so we sent him to a gifted school for a couple of years, and that's when the chase was on. Like, how do we keep up with him? How do we keep up with his brain? How do we properly support him and, in his development?
I always wonder about, there's gifted schools for the intellect.
Yeah.
For people that have accelerated, brain power that way.
Right.
But is there any people that are emotionally accelerated? Like, oh, you're so mature for 3.
Right, right. Well,
and you know, because if you're with people that are, you know, and you're studying things with people that are older, you still aren't caught up emotionally. So you're really in this quagmire.
No, fantastic. And, honestly, what I feel like we're doing with these presentations is reminding people of the importance of all the other aspects of human childhood development. It's not just about good grades and extracurriculars. It's about paying attention to how you feel, how you connect with other human beings, how you take care of yourself. One of the missions of Nami is to end the shame that surrounds mental health conditions. And you notice I say mental health conditions, not mental illnesses. They're the same thing. And I think if Nami were founded today, it was founded in 1979, I don't think it would be called National Alliance on Mental Illness. I think they would say mental health or mental health conditions, because mental illness is a stigmatizing term. And actually, we experienced that with my son when he was diagnosed and starting to try to wrap his mind around the fact that his brain that he'd been so celebrated for had betrayed him. And now he was being told he had bipolar disorder and mania, and he's trying to cope with all of that, and the fact that he has a mental illness.
I don't even like to call it a diagnosis, an awareness of a certain condition based on certain factors that none of us can really control.
You're ahead of the curve, Bob. When we started referring to my son's condition, mental health condition, rather than a mental illness, I feel it made a difference in how he was able to accept what was going on and then get help for it. And I love that you're saying, questioning the term diagnosis. I had a student the other day question, you say your son has bipolar disorder. Isn't that a negative way of talking about a disorder?
It kind of is.
We need a new glossary, and we do need new thinking around all this. And, I'm also not trying to soft pedal the challenges that come with a mental health condition. I'm not trying to put a rosy positive spin on it. It's fucking awful. And my son is one of the lucky ones because he got help and he accepted help soon. And he's now, he's off at Boston University. He's having a fucking great time, and he's making friends, and he's into his classes, and he's having some struggles, but they're quote unquote normal struggles. And
didn't you? I did. I had plenty of struggles.
Oh my God, no! I had a lot of struggles, but I didn't have the awareness that my son has. And again, remember to go back to what are the advantages of of this bad experience, of this ACE. One of the advantages for my son is he has a whole other kind of perspective and layer of self-awareness that he just wouldn't have had.
On the other side, what about the depression side? Did he have that too? Because man, everybody wants to sort of be manic a little bit. You get a lot done, and you're in a heightened state of this is great.
Right.
I'm sure he felt that way when it was going on.
Yeah, he did.
Right,
he definitely did.
But is there a B side to it also, or can it exist alone, mania or depression?
As I start off all my presentations by saying, I'm not a mental health expert. I'm a mental health advocate about that. But bipolar disorder, there's an up and there's a down. In my son's case, his downs were less frequent and less intense, and also especially after the diagnosis and after he started taking medication, they frequently were, I don't want to say caused by medication, but they were accompanied by this tremendous suppression he felt by taking all the meds he was put on. And that was a long journey. And, for anybody listening in there who's got a loved one or who is going through that challenge of trying to find a right medication, my heart goes out to you. I know how difficult it is, and I saw how, and it was really hard. And he went through a number of different medication changes and different dosages, and thank God, he seems to have found one that is working really well for him.
It must be really difficult because your body becomes a test tube where you're trying these different things to see what works, and then I'm sure there's an adjustment period for each of them, so it's not fast. It's not like, well, Wednesday I'll try this, and then Friday I'll try this. You've got to wait weeks to see how it's working or not working.
And you have to have a skilled physician, psychiatrist, mental health practitioner of some sort working with you on this. I have a friend who just died last week by suicide, and I've known him for 30 years. Never knew that he had a mother who suffered with bipolar disorder, and he lived a very off the grid life, and I think he was managing his ups and downs, and he would take advantage of the ups, and he was very creative spirit and write a lot of music. And then I think the downs, he'd sort of go into his cave a little bit. And again, I didn't see him a lot during those down periods, but he recently he reached out to a bunch of us saying that he was suffering. I told him from my experience how important it is to take care of your brain the way you took care. He had suffered a cycling accident this year too, so it was a tough year for him. But he spent a month in a hospital because of the cycling accident, and then rehabbing. And I said, you got to think of your brain in the same way. Take care of your brain. Take care of that beautiful brain of yours. And he totally heard me. There was no resistance. He wanted to, and then I found out he went to a couple of psychiatrists, one of whom prescribed some medication, and he did not like the way it made him feel. After 2 or 3 days, and he was gone 2 or 3 days after that. So I wish he'd been able to be hospitalized, but the psychiatrist didn't deem him a risk, to himself or others, and that's the measuring stick we have now in our world. Mm-hmm. So because of that, he was able to walk out of their office, and yeah.
It's nothing more dangerous than a professional.
Well, so our other friend went back and talked to both these psychiatrists, and not in an accusatory way, but just to let them know, like, this is what happened, and they both said, he did not present in that way, and we all want to blame someone, or we want to blame ourselves, and sometimes this our friend, he had a lifetime, or at least 35 years of his adult life managing himself. Yeah. So I think to make that transition to letting others and maybe letting outside people help and letting medication help was a really difficult one for him. Whereas with my son, only 18, and also my son is extraordinary, as I said, in a lot of different ways. One of them is he knows how to let people help him.
Well, those are really wonderful qualities for anyone.
Yeah.
What do they say? The two hardest things are to say, I don't know, and I need help. And those are really hard things. The ego doesn't want us to do that.
Right.
But those are the two saviors for any kind of, difficulty in life.
And personal growth. It used to be able to. That's right. I love that.
But the tricky part about a mental condition is that the brain itself gets hijacked by the condition and maybe can't help itself.
100%.
And so you can't really say or judge somebody that isn't able. Maybe they're just not able to get to do like your friend that just passed away.
Yeah. I do like how you run the ship around here, Bob.
Well, I do very little. That's the good part. I cross my legs and I sit back and I go, let them go.
Yeah, I like to be on ships where the captain very loose with the rules, and I think we're ready as a society to have more of these conversations, and that's what Nami is facilitating. So we do that. We have these school presentations. We also have, and we have classes, the family to family classes. So, and I love the name family to family because it's telling you what it is. It's family. It's the teachers are all family members who've been trained. So again, it's not doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists. It's not the pros. It's the people who've been in the trenches, who've been trained, and that they're the ones teaching. So you just tend to believe a little bit more what you're hearing when you're hearing it from someone who's gone through what you've gone through. So we have family-to-family classes, and we have peer-to-peer classes. And peers is the term for people who experience mental health conditions, and they can be any age. A lot of our peer programs tend to attract younger people, but we have. There are people all ages who are experiencing mental health conditions. We also have support groups, family support groups and peer support groups that meet on a weekly basis. And we're expanding these programs. And really what's very exciting, and I have to give a shout out to our executive director, Erin Ryan, I hope she's made it this deep into the podcast so she can hear herself.
I hope you put it up on the website.
100%.
I hope it's strong enough.
Yes. Well, no. For sure, of course. We'll and we'll be pulling out blurbs. But no, Erin has been an amazing captain of the Nami West Side ship, and she has a really diverse background too, and she's an actress, and she worked in politics, and also had nonprofit experience, which I didn't have. But we've made very effective partners, and she's really spearheaded the exponential growth of our local affiliate.
So it's education.
It's education,
and it is reach out kind of
support.
Workshops.
There's education, there's support. There is also advocacy, and I feel like that's an important part of the piece too, because one of the parts of the recovery for me that's been so important is becoming an advocate for people who aren't able to speak, or just advocating for the necessity of speaking out about mental health conditions.
Are there also referral services to doctors and psychiatrists, or how does that work? Because that's a tricky thing.
It is a tricky thing,
especially with a nonprofit.
So
like
what
that.
we do is we have partnerships. Like we partner with Dee Hirsch, and we will partner with in the Department of Mental Health. We can refer to organizations that also offer free services.
What's Dee Hirsch?
I shouldn't just assume everyone knows.
Well,
who
I don't
Dee
know.
Hirsch.
I like the name.
Yeah, Dee Hirsch is a phenomenal organization, and I can't tell you much about the history of it, but they have mental health services all over town, and I don't know exactly how many offices they have, but we hold one of our support groups and one of their offices in Culver City, and they just opened up a suicide prevention center on Olympic Boulevard. I can't say enough about how much great work they do.
Let's say someone is listening to this and they have a loved one, a friend or family member that is struggling with some kind of a mental condition.
Right.
They contact the National Alliance of Mental Illness.
There's a website. There's a website, a phone number, and they call us up, and we're all, we'll spend the time necessary to help them, talk them through what resources are available. And so we're always going to start with the classes and the support groups for the family members. Now, for the loved ones who may be suffering, they may need more. They may not be able to just get themselves into a peer-to-peer class. I mean, if you're suffering an acute manic episode, you're not going to go to a support group. So your family member needs support and help to know how to support you to getting help. And this is a real unfortunate feature of a lot of mental health conditions. I'm gonna sound like an expert here, but it's a term that I've learned from an expert called anosognosia. And that refers to, it's a lack of personal insight. And a lot of people with mental health conditions, especially when they're experiencing the most acute parts of them, they don't understand what's happening to them. And they're not, and again, if they're manic, they're just not able to see that they need help, or that they may not even want help. So it's really, that's where learning how to communicate differently comes in. That's where learning how to take care of yourself comes in. And these are the kinds of things that you're going to learn in a NAMI class, and it's going to get reinforced in a NAMI support group.
That's where you might learn how to, let's say you have someone like that, and they're saying, I don't have a problem.
Yeah.
You're people are calling me crazy or whatever, and I'm not crazy. It's everybody else.
Right.
And I like the way I feel, and there's not an issue here. How do you get those people to get some help, or how do you deal with somebody who doesn't want to get help?
My son was in that camp, and you kind of learn, again, every case is different. And I'm also going to plug now a guy named Dr. I'm forgetting his first name, Dr. Amador. And he wrote a book called I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help. And he wrote it. He had a brother with severe schizophrenia. And so it was through his personal experience. And that I'm not sick, I don't need help. I strongly urge, if you don't have it, go out and get it. And he developed this system of communicating first with his brother, but then he passed this on to patients, and now worldwide readers. His system of communicating with people with mental health conditions is known as the LEAP method, LEAP. Listen, empathize, agree, partner. And I'm not really equipped to go into depth on that method of communication, but I know that I learned enough to become proficient enough at it where it helped with my son and my ex-wife and I also. We got on the same page, and my ex-wife and I'm happy to say, are closer than we've ever been. We really have made a very effective team in supporting our son and also our daughter. And I don't want to forget the siblings. The siblings of people with mental health conditions, they go through a lot. It's challenging for them, and Nami helps them. My daughter, I'm glad I mentioned my daughter because she's now starting another Nami program at her high school. She's a junior in high school, called Nami on Campus, which allows Nami on Campus allows kids to start mental health clubs at their schools, and Nami will provide resources for them and how they, and again, turning them into advocates.
A couple of things that I thought might a sibling experience in this situation is, one, the person who is got the problem is getting all the attention, so they have a neglect piece because that takes so much time and energy, and there's so much heat around it all the time that they must feel a little bit neglected, just time-wise and also emotionally. So that might create a certain kind of resentment or distance from the parents and the sibling who's not doing as well.
Right.
And then there's also a piece of that I would imagine is this going to happen to me? I would be scared if I was the sibling of somebody that had a mental condition. And I don't know what else, those factors are, but, I have heard of situations in, my wife has this friend who had a son with a drug problem, and they spent years trying to help this kid, and the daughter felt neglected. As soon as she got old enough, she moved away, and she doesn't deal with the family at all. She's like, well, you had your chance to raise me, and you spent it, with the brother who never got better.
Right.
They enabled this kid, and so she lost two kids. She lost the kid that she enabled, and then she lost the daughter who doesn't want anything to do with her because she felt neglected. I'm not saying it's going to happen with you because you're obviously very aware.
No, I'm just nodding. I get it. I have a lot of recognition around that. I also growing up, I was the overtly troubled one. First of all, I had witnessed this awful thing happen with my mother. Then I got involved with drugs and alcohol. I got a lot of that attention that you were just talking about, that sort of that negative attention. And my younger brother, was like, hey, I'm good, nothing to see here. But that really wasn't, I think that was the shingle he hung up, and he did very well academically, and he went to Harvard, and, looked like he was on just fast track and everything, don't have to worry about that. But the fact is, I think he did feel a certain amount of neglect. And I was really determined because I had that perspective. I didn't want that to happen with our daughter, and I think my ex-wife felt the same way. But it invariably did happen. You can't help it.
To some degree, but not to the point.
Yeah, but you only have so much bandwidth, and But my daughter. And she's also wired very differently than my son. She's one of those, I think she's gifted emotionally. I really think, she just radiates warmth and compassion. I was at a beach volleyball game of hers yesterday, and I was talking to the head of the athletic department. And all he wanted to do was tell me what an impression that she'd made on everybody for her kindness. Both her mom and I have made a conscious effort to keep the focus on her, and she's done it. She's become a really good advocate for herself.
I'm just very touched by this whole story.
Well, but that sibling syndrome, it's a real thing. And like I was thinking, I wonder if we should start a sibling support group. And I don't know that we'd be able to, but maybe one day that I'll come back on your show and be able to tell you about.
It just seems like it's just part of the family support that would come up in some of the conversations.
Yeah.
How long do you think we've been talking?
Are we in the home stretch, you think?
Well, I think we're done.
Oh, you think we're done?
Well, because I'm gonna.
You're going to have to edit
I don't
this.
have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm definitely gonna edit it. I'll probably take this part out, or I'll leave it in. I don't know. Depends
well, I
what
defer
I feel
to
like
you.
doing.
Yes, it does. You're the captain.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, thank you for having me. I appreciate having this kind of a relaxed, honest conversation about this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, what a great organization.
Yeah.
And go to the website, podcast listeners,
Yeah.
National Alliance of Mental.
Well, can I say the website, or are you going to put it on your? How do you do this?
No, I want you to say it.
Okay. Well,
Say it. Say the actual website.
NamiLA.org. So it's NAMI, National Alliance Mental Illness, LA for Los Angeles.org. And our phone number is 310-889-7200. And it is our mission to serve everyone impacted by mental health conditions. And frankly, I think that's everyone.
It pretty much is, isn't it? If you're walking around.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Tim.
You're very welcome.
And I look forward to talking to you after the podcast is ended, which is now. Bye.
Thanks for listening to The Exploding Human. Please visit the website, theexplodinghuman.com, and subscribe to the YouTube channel, The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. Would really appreciate that. And big thanks again to Tim Davis. Love talking to that guy, and love that you guys have come to check out The Exploding Human, and we'll see you again. Bye.